All right, well, my clock says it's 4:05, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a couple of housekeeping things there. Because we are in webinar mode, you lovely people who showed up don't have the ability to talk. So if you have any questions, go ahead and put it in the chat. Renan has graciously offered to monitor chat for me, and he will pass along your questions. So that's how we're going to deal with that. Let me start with, I'm Natasha Hollenbach. I'm the Digital Projects Librarian at the Montana Historical Society. And we're going to be talking about Montana newspapers and the Belt Valley Times papers that are now available. There are going to be a couple different parts of this presentation. The main part is going to be me taking you through the website and showing you how everything works and doing some sample searches. And during that part of the presentation, we are going to take questions as they come in. And then once we're done with that part, I do have a few PowerPoint slides, which are more general about things to think about when you're searching for people in newspapers. And during that part, we're going to hold all questions till the end. So that being said, here we go. This is the Montana newspaper homepage, obviously. So it is a very simple montananewspapers.org, but if you ever forget it, if you come to the Montana Historical Society website, it's under Research, Online Collections and Finding Aids, Digitized Newspapers, and that's right there. And that gets you to the same place. If for whatever reason you don't want to go to the Montana Historical Society website, a Google search brings it up too. So there are many ways to get to our wonderful site. So I thought I would start with the About page, which is probably not something that you're going to need to go to, but just so you know what it is, it's more information for people who want to add content to the site, but something that is very exciting for you all, there is a list of contributing partners, and there you all are. And if for some reason you have a desire to learn about newspaper copyright, you have a description. I don't recommend it, but it's there if you're ever interested. There is a help site. This, I think, will be useful for you all to go back to because I am going to throw a lot of information at you during this presentation. So this will help refresh your memory. I am hoping in the next few months to do some video tutorials that I'll embed on this site so that it becomes a little bit less text and photo heavy. So that's something to look forward to, and will hopefully improve your experience when you have questions. Beyond that, before we get to searching, we are going to look at the browsing options. The browse by location is a map, which you probably won't use a whole lot, but it is useful if you're trying to find out what towns around the location you're looking for has content. So of course, there's Belt. So Great Falls is over there and Geyser is over here. So it's an option, something that's fun. And then if for some reason you just want to see what newspapers are being published in any particular week, you can go to the browse by date. I decided to kind of come over here and look in this week because this is the week that the United States entered World War I. And so you can kind of see who was publishing and who we have content from. And from here, you can click on it and it goes right to the issue. But all that being said, the tab that you're probably going to use the most in the browse options is going to be the browse by title. And there are a lot of things in here that are important. So if you click on the title itself, it takes you to kind of a mini catalog record. It always has this little essay, which usually tells you a little bit about the community and the newspaper. I try to make it so that these tell you something about what the paper is focusing on instead of the other way of doing newspaper essays, which is kind of a history of who's running the paper. And some are more one and some are more the other. And but it is kind of a useful piece of information if you're just kind of trying to get a sense of what the paper is. And then you have copyright information, which is always important. But back over here, of course, under the title, you have, of course, the location of the paper. But then this date range right here is the date that the paper was published, not the dates that are on the website. In order to find out what dates are on the website, that is over here. But of course, this tells you what the earliest issue is and what the latest issue is, but it doesn't really tell you what's going on in between. And sometimes that is where things go wrong sometimes. I feel like the date ranges that are available on newspaper websites is one of those things that people don't spend enough time looking into. And the Belt Valley Times is actually one of those instances. You all raised money to digitize the Belt Valley Times through 1918. And then we had chosen to digitize 1921 through 26 for our Chronicling America grant. However, as you can see here, there is a gap. It goes from July 11th, 1918 through, and then there's a complete gap with nothing there until October 13th. And as far as I know, that is not us choosing not to digitize it. As far as I know, those issues do not exist anywhere. Now, the thing about working with Montana newspapers is that I have had newspapers just discovered on, you know, some institution that just discovers them and we find them and we can add them. But as of now, this is a little over 3 years that don't exist anymore. But, you know, unless you're looking at the calendar view, you don't know that. So one of the things I'm going to suggest is if you are doing searching in the newspapers and you're not coming up with results, go to the calendar view and make sure that there is content for what you're searching. So obviously, if there are no issues, you're not going to get results. So that being said, we're going to go into one of the issues. And once you're in the issues, you have some options that of course shows you every page. And from here, you can go, you know, forward and backwards. But you also have the option of looking at all of the front pages for that paper, which can sometimes be helpful because sometimes you'll see like sometimes the front pages are interesting because you'll see what's important or what's not. Like you'll have a certain period where there's always a cartoon in the middle of the front page at top, or there'll be an advertisement that comes or goes, or, you know, things like that. This is also a useful thing if you're just trying to find something visually interesting because you're putting together a presentation. But generally, it's not necessarily something that you're going to do a lot. But one of the things that I did want to point out while we're on this kind of page is that there are 76 pages of front pages for the Belt Valley Times. And let's say, for instance, that you really wanted to look at 1909, let's say. Well, you're not going to want to go, you know, 2 pages at a time. So that's where you get to, you know, jump to page. And this is actually a little too far. This is 1913, but then you can go back. And it's not only when you're looking at front pages. If you've done a search result and you have 200 search results, this is something that you're going to be able to do. And then we're just going to look at this issue because it had pretty pictures. This is actually a special edition, and they were very excited about touting things in the area. And so let's talk about the viewer window. So the page view window is, of course, the black space. I have a wheel on my mouse, and that's how I zoom in and out. But you got to make sure that your mouse is inside the black window. If you're outside the black window, you're moving the whole page. And I know it's one of those basic things, but sometimes you just need someone to tell you the basic things. If your mouse doesn't have a wheel, you do have zoom options over here. If you go really far in and you're just like, oh gosh, you can come here and it takes you back to kind of the home view. And then if you are one of those people who prefer to have a full screen, there is a full screen option. And it's actually really interesting because I was playing around with this, getting ready for the presentation, and I discovered that if you change pages in this option, you stay in home screen, but if you click to the next page on that one, it kicks you out of it. Who knew? But if you're messing with it that way and that happens to you, it's not you, that's what it's supposed to do. And then you have all the same options here, so you can come straight to here. And that's useful if you're in an issue and the editorial is on page 4 or the local section. It's just a faster way. Or if you have that you have a citation for an obituary in a specific issue and you come to it, but you don't know what page it is, then you can use the little arrow keys and go page by page until you find what you're looking for. And you can do the same with issues. And if you click all issues, you go to the beginning. And we're going to go to the first page, to the first issue of the Belt Valley Times. Because one of the most asked questions is, of course, what is the best way to crop and keep an article? And so we are going to use this article about where is Daniel Cameron as our example. And the best way is to zoom in so that your article is in the box. I can actually do that a little bigger now. And then you click the scissors with the box over here on the side, and this takes you to the preview window, which is really nice because then you can make sure that your image is actually being kept. And then you're on your print preview screen. If you print from this page, this information up here also prints. And that is important in both good and bad ways. The good thing is that now you know exactly where your article came from and you're not going to be confused when you run across it 20 years later. The bad news though is that if you have a really big article, it means that because so much of the page is being taken up with this, by the time this article gets printed, it's going to be too small for you to actually read. So if you do have a larger article, you might end up needing to crop it in sections and print sections at a time. So that's if you're printing. If you're downloading an image, this information doesn't stay. It ends up being just the image from the page. So what I always tell everyone, because this is what I do myself, when I save images, I always, and you can see I was practicing this earlier today, so I already have a file name created for it. But I always do the newspaper title and then the date and the page number as part of my file name. And I always do it year, month, day. And the good thing about doing it year, month, day is that if you are cropping multiple pages and articles from the same paper, it does mean that in the file folder that you're keeping them in, they'll be in chronological order, which if you're someone like me, that's very important to you. But I do know that for many of you doing genealogy, you are going to want to add something to the file name to tell you what it is. And that's where the Daniel Cameron part of it came from. You know, it may work better for you to do the Daniel Cameron and then do the citation information. It doesn't really matter. I'm just trying to make it so that when you run across things later, you'll know where they're from. Important random computer information for you. It's better if your file names don't have spaces, which is why I have an underscore in it. So just something to consider. However, it may be that if you have one of those longer articles, so say it's a full column or a column and a half article, it may be better if you are just keeping the full page. And so that's these options up here. So I just opened the PNG, which is of course an image file, but there's also the PDF. And granted, that's going to be much more useful if it is a big article. I know a lot of the genealogy, you end up cropping those 2 sentences about someone, you know, who's out of town, or someone who's got in-laws coming to visit them or whatever. And for those, I can see not wanting to keep a full page because, you know, it's going to take you 5 minutes to find it on the page when you look at it again in a year. So either way works, but the PDF is probably, if you're taking the full page, is what you'd want to keep because it is searchable and that makes things easier. But I am just trying to make sure you know your options. And then you have the text file. So a little digitization basics. When you digitize newspapers or really any text document, you know, you scan it as an image file, and then you run it through the OCR software, which is the optical character recognition, and that's what turns it into text. So when you're putting things in your search box, this is what it's searching, not the image that you're actually seeing. It's fine. But this OCR is, as you can see, good. Like you can read it. However, OCR is not perfect at all. I think the last statistic I saw is that good OCR is about 70%, but that means that there's 30% that they are not getting right. So for instance, right here, Montana, that has a U instead of an N, the search boxes are very literal. What you put in is what you're getting out. So if you are searching for Montana, this is not going to show up unless there is Montana spelled correctly somewhere else on this page will not return. And so that is the other main reason why, if you are searching something and it's not coming up, it might be the OCR. One of the things I look at before I digitize is to see how well things are going to OCR, and I do try, but you know, it is what it is by that point. I had a question earlier from someone who couldn't make it today, and she was asking about an opportunity to volunteer to clear up OCR, because I know there are many other newspaper projects that do have that capability. Unfortunately, we are not set up for that, and we're not going to be anytime in the near future. So we kind of just have to live with the OCR the way it is. And I know that it's kind of, I'm not saying that, you know, there's a problem with this. I personally feel like I should tell you that the OCR is potentially a problem, because I know, at least for me, knowing what might be causing me to not find things makes me less frustrated, because then at least you can go to some of these text files and see if that's what the problem is. So that is where we are on that. But now that we're finished browsing, we're going to look at searching. I almost always go to the advanced search. I like the options it gives me, and it gives you a little bit more control over what you're going to get back. Obviously, you have all the newspapers here, and you can pick specific newspapers. Or right here, it gives you directions on how to choose multiple titles. For most of the rest of this presentation, I'm just going to search the Belt Valley Times, and you know, that I think is what many of you are going to do. But I do want to emphasize that the Montana papers reprint articles from each other constantly. So those 3 years that we don't have the Belt Valley Times for, I suspect that if you search there will be articles from the Belt Valley Times in other papers that are online. So I want to make sure that you're not always narrowing yourself and you do expand your horizons. And then of course you have the date options. And then there are 4 search boxes. I only ever use 2, but I'm going to take you through what all 4 of them are, so at least you know so that at least you know what they all are. And then you can make your own determination on which box you want to use. Any of the words. This is, for those of you who learned about Boolean search back in the day, this is the OR box. I personally think it is the most useless box that was ever put on a newspaper website. This is if you have multiple words, it is pulling up any page that has at least one of the words in your search box. The only way I can see this being useful, and you can kind of see it up here in my the things I was trying to do, is when you have two terms that mean the same thing. So I was doing pertussis and whooping cough because I was struggling that much to find a reason to use this box. But honestly, I think you'd actually be better off just searching for each of those terms individually than trying to use that box. Any of the words is your basic keyword search. So it is, all of the words will be on the page, but this is a newspaper, and unlike a book or an article, you know, newspapers are talking about multiple things on one page. And so a lot of times if you use this box, you'll have, you know, one word down in the far left bottom corner and the other one will be in the middle of the right. And so, yeah, they're on the page, but it doesn't help you because they're not together, which is why I always use the phrase, and then this is the proximity search. The phrase is what it sounds like. It's when you need these words in this order. So, you know, that's, I suspect, what most of you will use the most because it's when you have names or businesses. But the proximity search is also useful. So if you had, you know, you were looking for someone's funeral, and so you have their name and funeral, that would be a proximity search. It does default to 5. I always change it to 10 because that gives it a little bit more wiggle room. 5 is just too close together. I've occasionally tried 50, but it was usually because I wasn't finding anything, and 50 was just one more checkbox to say, yes, there really is nothing here. Because usually 50 words will kick you into another article, and so it doesn't really end up helping. But there is this search box at the top, which is, you know, what most people automatically use. Oh, pretend like I'm not doing this. I'm going to talk about this filter later. It's fine. Don't worry. And you can't tell it from this search, but this box is a proximity search within 5 words, which is one of the reasons I don't use it. But I do have coworkers who use it all the time and don't have a problem with it. So my way is not the only way. It's just the best way. So I'm going to do a quick, you know, Jeanette Rankin. Jeanette with 1 N is 6 results. If you do Jeanette with 2 N's, it's 11. Which is my really quick version of, if we can't decide on how to spell someone of state and national importance, it really shouldn't surprise us that the newspapers spell everybody's name wrong, and in multiple ways. It's a point we'll come back to because it's really important to just remember, it doesn't matter that you're spelling your person's name right. That does not mean that the newspapers will. So we are, however, going to go, while I'm here, we are going to talk about the filter. So You can filter by year here, but it does kind of, you can go, you know, specific year. I mean, obviously with Jeanette Rankin with 11 results, that seems kind of silly, but if you're doing a result where you have 70, it might be more useful. And then you see that you have these things, the filters there, and you can just come over here and get rid of them, and then everything goes back. But we are going to come over here and do another search. And this is when I was going to show you about the filtering with cities. So this is going to be a moment where I admit that something has happened and I'm not entirely sure why. There is Belt, and Armington. Armington is also the Belt papers. And the reason that Belt and Armington are showing two different numbers right now, because they didn't for Jeanette, I don't know if you all saw it, but it didn't for Jeanette, but it does for this, because somewhere along the line, the Belt Valley Times up through 1918 are falling under both towns, but the Belt Valley Times 1921 to 26 aren't. So just use Belt and ignore Armington, but I just wanted you all to know that I know that it's doing that. So here we have all of Lee Johnson. And if you're only going to listen to one thing I say about the search results, this is the thing I want you to pay attention to, is the sort by. Almost every digital searching thing defaults to whatever their definition of relevance is, and we almost never know what it is. But as an example, I do know what's going on in Montana newspapers, and I will tell you that relevance in Montana newspapers is a straight up math problem. It is how many times your search words, so how many read words are there, divided by how many words are on the page. And that is what is most relevant. So yeah, not useful to you, which is why I always change it to sort by date, because I find that much more useful. Whether you're searching for a person or an event, to me, it makes much more sense to be going through the results chronologically. I think that makes it so much more logical, and you're less likely to get confused. Another reason to do it this way is Montana newspapers has actually been behaving really well today. I haven't had any problems with it, but every now and then you'll be working on it and it'll basically give you an error message that is basically, I need a minute, come back later. Usually when you get that message, you just really, it's like 30 seconds to 2 minutes and it's fine again. But whenever it does that to me, I have a tendency to close my tab in my browser. So when I come back, I have to completely redo the search I'm doing. So it's when I'm going chronologically, it's a lot easier for me to say, oh yeah, I stopped in 1902, as opposed to I was on like result 30. So those are all my reasons to change your sort by to date. So there is a reason that I decided to search for Lee Johnson. And that is because I wanted to show you up here, there is view results. Right now we're looking at the gallery view. There is also a list review. I prefer gallery. And one of the reasons is because that gives you a preview so you can see where the red is. And you can see Lee Johnson is mostly in these county correspondence, so the local news sections, which means that you would actually want to look at them. If you're looking at them, sometimes, your search results will be in the middle of a fiction story, or you'll see that it's a national sports page or whatever. It just gives you some context as to what you're looking at. The other thing it can do is that down here in 1924, Lee Johnson is the proprietor of the Busy Bee Lunchroom. And so you can see in here, there's a lot of these little ads, and, you know, in a couple of these, that's the only place where Lee Johnson is appearing on the page. So once you've seen that ad once, you don't necessarily need to be looking at every single one of those. But it would be useful to look at this one, because not only do we have the Busy Bee Lunchroom ad, but over here, Lee Johnson is on the list of individuals who are supporting the local ball club. And while we're on here, I have discovered another reason to use the advanced search. So when you use the advanced search up here, you can click through and you can go in order through the search results without having to go back to the search result page. But if you search in up here in this search box and you go to a search result, oh, I guess I didn't click it. That option isn't up here, which is something I discovered getting ready for this presentation, because I never used that search box and I didn't realize that it wasn't an option. So again, who knew? So that's kind of how everything works. I am going to show you one more article as we kind of shift from how the site works and using it to kind of more general things to think about. And with this particular article, we are going to talk about kind of how to determine what your date ranges should be and how to think about time in the newspapers. And whenever I start talking about this topic, I almost always end up showing articles about one of the world wars. So this article is actually really interesting because it's got letters and or excerpts of letters from, I think it's 3 or 4 different men from Belt who are serving in World War I. And this is May 2nd, 1918. And most of these letters are from March. So it's not a huge difference, but, you know, things take time. And I know we all kind of know that that happens in war, but it also happens at other times too. So if you're looking for like a marriage or a death or a birth right around Christmas, often you have to give it another week. If it's happening right at the end of election season, even in the 19-teens, the newspapers go a little crazy around election time, and those 2 or 3 issues before the election tend to be kind of consumed with the political news, where they're talking about every candidate and everybody's position, and so anything else kind of gets shifted a week or so. And I mean, there's nothing, it's not a problem, it's just something you should be aware of, that, you know, sometimes you're expecting something to be, well, it happened on the 2nd, why isn't it in the next issue? Well, because something else happened. One of the things I've also noticed with obituaries is that, you know, earlier, you know, at the time that we have the Belt Valley Times online, it tends to be the newspaper writing them, whereas, you know, more contemporary, it tends to be the family who's submitting things like that, and so that often takes longer. Just changing times. So that is kind of where we are for that. Renan, do we have any questions that I need to answer before I move to PowerPoint? Or should I just move to PowerPoint? Okay, I'm just going to move to PowerPoint. If there are any questions, we'll deal with them after that. So I thought it was important to take a couple of minutes and actually take a step backwards and go, why are people even in the newspapers? So you know, this is just a list of thoughts for when people appear in newspapers, but generally speaking, it's major life events, and I kind of feel like we should add crime to the list of major life events that we all hope not to be involved in, but if it happens, it's major. But I think it's important to at least consider the possibility that you have ancestors that are just quietly living their lives and so don't show up in the newspapers. Clearly, a place like Belt, anyone who lives in Belt is much more likely to appear in a newspaper than someone who's living in Helena or Great Falls or, the bigger places. And kind of along that line, what constitutes this wealthy, influential, socially active section is definitely, obviously different. But, you could be socially active, but not, I guess what I mean is that for the newspaper, socially active means you are a instigator of things. Like you're the one who's actually planning the event, or you're not only a member of one of the fraternal organizations or one of the women's clubs, but you're an officer in one of those. Like those are the times that you get your name in the newspaper, as opposed to if you're just a member and you show up at things. Well, the event is covered, but your name probably isn't on it. So if you are doing genealogy, I think it is useful to go to the newspaper for where they're living and just see what's happening. Because even if they're not showing up, that doesn't mean that they're not at these events. So, but I like to pull this up because I can't tell you how many people we get in the reference room who come in who their ancestor was in not just a town, but just somewhere in Montana for 2 or 3 years. And like, they're not going to be in the newspaper because part of being in the newspaper is being an active member of the community. So just something to think about. And I told you we were going to come back to names and spellings. So we're gonna spend the next couple of slides on names because it's worth repeating and repeating and repeating. Names. So this particular slide is about a murder case, and James Mackey, who is all the little blue squares, I was trying to find him. He is the one who was murdered, and I was having a hard time finding him. And I finally flipped so that I was searching for Bill Gay murderer as a proximity search, which is why it's all in red. And that's when everything started to pop up. And as you can see, it's because the newspapers couldn't decide how to spell James Mackey's name. I particularly like this one over here, where this newspaper completely lost their minds and decided he was a William instead of a James. But then over here, he was a deputy sheriff. So of course he's deputy sheriff as opposed to his first name. So this is when I emphasize again that you never know how they're going to be reported. So you don't just want to put in the spelling that you know is how it's spelled. You want to go, well, how else would I spell it if I had never seen it written? It's also, think about whether they have a title that they might be using instead. For William, this is an abbreviation of William. Think about the abbreviations of names. It took me forever to come to terms with the fact that a lot of the newspapers do Joseph as J-O-S. Like, that doesn't make any sense to me, but that's how it goes. And then there are the initials. So I know that this is a women's slide, but it's also worth pointing out because of all the initials that are on this slide. I like to highlight Miss Sarah Baker here because she's the only woman in this whole article about a musical club that is run by women. She's the only one with a first name that's hers. Everybody else is Mrs. her husband's name or Mrs. her husband's initials, which is even more fun. So when you are searching for people You know, first name, initials, nicknames, titles, you got to try it all. And as a reminder, as I was saying earlier, whatever you put into the search box is what you get out. So if you had put George Calvert, I don't think George B. Calvert would have showed up because there's an extra letter in there that they're not expecting back. So sometimes you got to do first name, middle initial, last name. Yeah, it's an adventure. But when you're looking at newspapers, you then have the added complication of, okay, you found a person, you found an article with the name you're looking for, but is that article about the person I'm looking for? And these two articles are from a search I was doing several years ago. I was searching A.J. King, and I was kind of tracing his life and his history. He was from Kalispell. He was in local politics, and then he became a state prohibition officer, and so he was involved in things. And so I was tracing him, and there was this weird period where I was finding him in Missoula, and I just kind of went, okay, sure. And it took me a lot longer than it should have to realize that the A.J. King in Missoula was a different person. And it finally dawned on me with these articles where they're talking about the kids, because the A.J. King I was following had two sons who were old enough to be soldiers in World War I, whereas the A.J. King who worked for the Daily Missoulian had a younger daughter. Not the same person, clearly. So it's that, but this slide is also where I point out to you that sometimes you got to go at things sideways. So I think I said earlier, you know, don't just look for the person, look for people around them, immediate family, business partners, where they work, just basically anything you can think of, try it. And now I'm going to kind of talk the next couple of slides about how do you know what you know, because some things are unexpected. So I was telling you earlier how I encourage people to not just search one newspaper. I think you should search the whole site and expand your search, which I know sounds funny after I've just told you that as you expand your search, you're going to come up with search results that aren't about your person. Welcome to genealogy research. But this particular article is actually from Idaho, and it's a marriage announcement, but it's interesting, and I talk about it because the groom was from West Virginia and was living in Spokane. The bride was from Virginia, and they got married in Idaho. They got married on a Thursday and left for Spokane on Friday. As far as I know, they never lived in Idaho. And so if you don't know that, you're going to assume that they got married in Washington or Virginia, and you would be very wrong. So sometimes people turn up in unexpected places. And dates. This is another example of just because you're right doesn't mean the newspapers are. And especially since many of you are using the vital records that you come across to build your timeline, I think that this is a really important article for anyone who does genealogy. The man in this article was arrested by federal authorities because he failed to register for the draft in World War I, because his naturalization papers said he was 30. He wasn't. His age on his naturalization papers were wrong, so he had to send back to Ireland for his birth certificate to prove that he was 33. Like, it's just, so it's not only, you know, sometimes it's, you know, you're right and the newspaper is wrong. Sometimes the newspaper is right and what you've already found is wrong. It's just making sure that you're flexible and you kind of give yourself that leeway for people to be people and make mistakes. And then I like this development to talk about how long news takes, because I think so many of us forget how much communication has changed even in the last 30 years. this is Bill Ernst. He was from Helena, and he was on the battleship West Virginia during Pearl Harbor. And so in December 8th, they're going, he was on the West Virginia, and it's reported that it sank. On December 9th, there were rumors swirling that he was dead, and the family basically goes, will you all please stop it? We don't know what happened to him. Please stop saying he's dead. And it's not until December 26th that his father finally gets a letter from him saying that he's okay. So it is 19 days before they find out that someone who was at Pearl Harbor is okay. I mean, this is granted a more extreme case than what you're probably going to look at, but I think it's just important for us to all expect things to take longer than we would like them to in the newspaper, and to expand that date range possibly a little bit longer than you think you should have to. So we are now at question time. If anybody has anything that they want to ask, you know, even if it's just something that you're researching that you want to have a brainstorming session on. And if you don't, you all are, you know, free to contact me. Let me leave this up for a second, but that's my contact information. You all know it. And while I wait for you all to type, I did promise that I would talk about one other thing and just give you all a heads up. So you all actually donated more money than we needed to digitize the newspapers. So what we did with the rest is we digitized, it's the Belt Valley History 1877 to 1979 book. It is not available yet, but it is expected to go up sometime next week. So I just wanted to kind of show you where it's going to be. County histories. It's going to be in this category, in this collection. And it should show up right there. So, and this is kind of just how it works. And it's in here, and you can sit there and browse pages. And you can search the record. I'm pretty sure that this right here is actually that awful box that I was telling you about. That's the or any of the words. So if you put in a name here, it's going to pull up any page with the first name and any page with the last name. So you're actually, if you're going to search this, I know I just did this a complicated way and did it, but it's better for you to come over here and set it up so that this is the only collection showing, and then search it in this box, because that box is a phrase search. Yeah. Sometimes things aren't as complicated as they or as easy as they should be. And I know I went through that really fast. So this is just mtmemory.org. But if you don't want to remember that, if you come to that same place, Montana Historical Society, online collections and finding aids, it's right here. And then county histories. And that gets you to where we were earlier. So it's all there. All right, I've been talking at myself with no feedback for 54 minutes. Does anyone have anything to say?
We're still here, Natasha. Thank you.
Yay!
Good job, Natasha.
Thank you. I know that was a lot. I hope it all kind of flowed and made sense and at least gave you new information than what you already knew.
Barbara and Betty, I'm gonna promote you to where you can
Talk.
give some verbal comment if you'd like. It's a limited audience, so I think that's pretty safe.
Yeah.
Okay, if any of you, Barbara or Betty, have a microphone enabled, you should be able to just, you know, ask any questions if you like, or whatever you'd like to say.
This is Barbara.
This has been a great presentation. And I want to thank everyone who helped make this possible, everybody who supported this effort, everybody who worked on it in the Historical Society to make this a reality. Both this and helping us get the Belt History book published or digitized. My mother was very instrumental in that book, and she would be so proud to see this done today if she were still here. So thank you to everyone for all your support.
And definitely thank you to you, Barbara, because I know that you helped us get, copyright forms and everything figured out for the history book, which we couldn't have digitized it without your all support on that one.
I'm anxious to go in and look at it as soon as it's up.
Yeah. I talked to the person working on it today and she said next week. So maybe give it to the following week.
Unmute. So this is Betty. So it's digitized now up through 26?
Yes.
Yeah. So is there a plan or is there any reason to go forward to 1977 then? What's the general posture of doing newspapers more recently?
So I've actually been talking to Gladys over at the Belt Library, and they do have some funding. They're actually, the board is actually interested in starting in 77 and going backwards. So it looks like, given the funding they have, it's either going to be 1942 or 1945 through 1977. So there should be more coming, but I don't know if there are plans to do what's in between.
So that would be between 26 and 45 potentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's the other reason why I was like, you got to be careful about that earliest issue and that latest issue, because when that comes up, it's going to have the earliest issue at 1894 and the latest issue in 1977, and it's going to look like it's all done, even though it's not.
Right, right. So is there a way then that we as contributors to this project would know what there's money for? Say if it's 45 to 77, that's what they choose to do. Is there a way that we would know that those other years are not going to be done until there's more money to do it? I assume that's the situation.
Yeah, that's kind of where we are. I'm going to pass that off to Gladys, as if in 6 months or a year, whatever, you just kind of want to see what's going on. Right. I think she would be the person to ask.
Yep, that's good. So Barb, is that something that you and Judy are on top of?
Well, we haven't talked about it or thought about it at this point. We've just been anxious to get this first section done. And then of course we got diverted looking at the Belt History book. But once we know what the Belt Library is going to do, then I think that would be a good time for some of us to revisit this whole thing and maybe do another campaign. It would be nice to have it for the whole entirety, that there are papers available.
Yeah, yeah.
And I have looked at all the reels. So because when I started talking to the Belt Library, they were going to pick up 1927 and go forward, and then they changed their mind. So I've actually looked at all the reels and I have all the page counts and everything. So, I mean, I can tell you how much money it would cost pretty quickly once that gets settled. So.
Yeah, if you could forward that information to us, once we know exactly what the Belt Library is going to do, then that would give us an idea of what we might need to look at in terms to get those intervening years done.
I think it's going to be about what it was to get this section done.
Okay.
I think is what it is ballpark where it is.
Well, and we would probably want to contact people, and there may be, because we're looking at a different time span here, there may be very different people who would have links from the late 1920s up until the Second World War that would be interested in seeing this, as opposed to some of the people that were particularly interested in those earlier years.
And I think that's kind of what the Belt Library had decided, that they wanted to do kind of the more contemporary, so that it was, you know, the people in Belt and kind of their parents who were in the papers, and that might be more interesting to them.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah. And then there's a couple of Belt papers that are, I think it's like 1980 something. Like it's a little bit after the 1977, but that's when you run into copyright. So we've kind of put that on hold until they can figure out who they have to get permission from.
Right. It had changed. Well, I think it had completely changed its name, and it may have even changed who was publishing it in that.
Yeah, it did.
Belt Eagle.
Yeah, it did. There's the Belt. There's a gap, and I think the gap is because there was the big fire in the late 70s, and so there's a gap because of that. And then there's a few more years of the Belt Valley Times, and then it becomes the Belt Eagle.
This is Bruce. I'm in Helena, and I've been watching this for a while, and I'm just really proud of all of you, Barbara, Betty, and others who have contributed to this project. This is how history is recorded, and to take that much pride in your community, and to make sure this project preserves the history of the community of Belt and the surrounding area. It's just a huge, important project, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, I'll tell you, the person who really needs to be thanked for this, and I don't think she's on the tutorial today, is my cousin, Judy Grogan Gedros.
Yeah.
She started doing research on the Grogan family and the Kennedy family, and she set as a task to start reading from the very first issue of the Belt Valley Times as far as she could go. And she has read every single issue on microfilm, which is not an easy task, from 1894 through 1911. And it was her being there regularly, looking at all those files and talking to people at the Montana Historical Society, that really got the interest and support to pursue this. So kudos to Judy, because she really has done hero's work on this whole project.
Definitely.
Well, kudos to Judy, sorry.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the thing. I mean, most of us don't have the time or the eyesight to spend that much time on microfilm going page by page. And I think that a lot of the newspaper projects are really going to change how history is written, because previously, you know, the only newspapers that ever showed up in any history writing was, you know, New York Times, Chicago Tribune, like those kind of papers. Like they never had the access to the small town papers. And I do wonder how that's going to change how history is written going forward.
Well, go ahead.
The small town papers are the ones who really record the daily life.
Yeah.
Here, agree.
Yeah.
It's from who had tea at somebody's house on Saturday afternoon to really world-shaking events in the community or the larger world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my coworkers, Zoanne Stoltz, she has this really great presentation about Montanans on the Titanic. And so it really is the small town papers that kind of connect your, you know, the local communities to some of those big national events that you don't really think of as having anything to do with you. So, yeah.
Thank you.
And it helps you see how times change. One story that it was in some of the materials that Judy forwarded to me as she was researching was my great-grandfather, John K. Kastner, who was really the founder of BELT, periodically made trips back to Pennsylvania to visit his family. And at one point he went back and he took a side trip to Washington, D.C. And it was reported in the Bell paper he actually met Teddy Roosevelt. Now, today you could not just take a side trip to Washington, D.C. and see the president.
No.
It's a totally different world. But he also said in the article in the paper that the greatest moment of the whole trip was when the train crossed back into that great state of Montana and he was home again.
That sounds like the inspirational thing to end on.
Well, I thank you so much for this. It was just great. And I look forward to doing some browsing in it and finding what I need to look at. So I think we're one of those families, not unlike you, Barb, we're one of those families where I'd say that they were in the area in the late teens, but didn't really move to the Belt area. They spent more time over in Stockton, San Cooley. So that whole area, I think, could have been recorded in the Belt Valley Times. I don't know. So.
Some of it is. I've seen some of, it does have some of the surrounding communities, and
Yeah.
I remember seeing those names.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming.